My child, do not scroll away from this moment, because something has been unfolding behind doors you could not see, in conversations you were never invited to hear, and in hearts that have been carrying your name more often than you realize. Pause here for a moment. There is a reason these words found you now. What I am about to reveal is not meant to frighten you, chase you, or make you search anxiously for signs. It is meant to remind you that sometimes the most important changes begin quietly, long before they become visible. And recently, in the world surrounding the person your heart has been connected to, your name entered a room filled with people who thought they already understood the story. By the time that conversation ended, almost no one in that room believed the same thing they believed when it began. You have wondered before whether anyone truly understood what existed between you and this person. You have wondered whether their family knew anything about you, whether your name had ever been mentioned, whether they had formed opinions without knowing the whole story, and whether your soulmate had ever defended what they felt when you were not there to defend yourself. There were moments when silence made you imagine the worst. There were days when distance seemed louder than love. There were nights when you may have felt that if something meaningful really existed, surely it would have been spoken about openly by now. But you could not see what was happening beneath the surface. You could not hear the private questions. You could not see the hesitation in your soulmate's eyes whenever someone came too close to asking the one question they were not ready to answer. For a long time, your soulmate believed they could keep their feelings contained. They convinced themselves that if they remained quiet, everything would remain manageable. They could continue living normally, continue answering ordinary questions, continue pretending that your presence had not changed something fundamental inside them. But there is a difference between hiding a secret and hiding a transformation. A secret can remain buried. A transformation begins showing itself in everything. It changes the way someone speaks. It changes what excites them. It changes what no longer satisfies them. It changes the kind of future they can imagine. And slowly, the people closest to your soulmate began noticing that something had shifted. At first, no one knew exactly what it was. One family member thought your soulmate was simply becoming more serious about life. Another believed they were distracted by work, responsibilities, or some decision they had not shared yet. Someone else noticed that they had become unusually protective of their phone at certain moments, not because they were necessarily hiding messages, but because certain memories connected to you lived there. A photograph. A conversation. A song. A sentence they had reread more than once. Your name might not have been displayed on the screen, but your emotional fingerprint was everywhere. Then someone noticed something even more revealing. Whenever conversations turned toward relationships, marriage, future plans, or the kind of person your soulmate might eventually choose, your soulmate's expression changed. They could laugh through almost any topic. They could answer casual questions. But the moment someone asked what they actually wanted, their confidence would disappear for a second. Not because they did not know the answer. Because they knew it too well. Your soulmate had already imagined a life involving you. Perhaps they never admitted that completely, even to themselves. Perhaps they called it a possibility. Perhaps they labeled it imagination, curiosity, hope, or a feeling they needed to understand. But heaven watches what hearts do before mouths are brave enough to speak. And your soulmate had already traveled mentally into moments that had never happened. They had imagined telling their family about you. They had imagined you walking into gatherings where everyone already knew your name. They had imagined watching you speak with the people who shaped their childhood. They had wondered who would like you immediately, who would ask too many questions, who would quietly study you, who would tease them afterward, and who would somehow recognize the depth of the connection without needing an explanation. But imagining that moment and actually allowing it to happen were very different things. Your soulmate carried fears you may never have known about. They feared being misunderstood. They feared family opinions complicating something they already found difficult to understand. They feared someone saying the wrong thing and planting doubt where their heart had been trying to grow courage. They feared having to explain why you mattered so much when the story between you had not unfolded in a simple, predictable way. Because this was never a story your soulmate could summarize easily. You were not merely someone they found attractive. You were not merely someone they enjoyed talking to. You had become connected to questions they were asking about themselves. Why did one person's silence affect them so deeply? Why could they move through an entire day normally and still think of you when everything became quiet? Why did certain songs suddenly seem to describe something they had never told anyone? Why did they find themselves remembering tiny details about you that they usually forgot about everyone else? Why did they sometimes want to reach out with complete honesty and then stop themselves at the last second? Those questions followed them into the family gathering you knew nothing about. It did not begin dramatically. That is important for you to understand. There was no announcement saying, "Everyone sit down, we need to talk about this person." It began almost casually, perhaps around a table, perhaps after a meal, perhaps when people had gathered for another reason entirely. Familiar voices filled the room. Someone was telling a story. Someone was checking their phone. Someone was laughing about an old memory. Your soulmate was physically present, but part of them seemed somewhere else. One person noticed. It was someone who knows your soulmate better than your soulmate sometimes realizes. Someone who can hear what is not being said. Someone who has watched their patterns for years. This person looked at them and asked a simple question. What is going on with you lately? Your soulmate tried to dismiss it. Nothing. Just tired. Just thinking. Just a lot happening. But the room had already shifted. Another person added that they had noticed it too. Someone else joked that your soulmate had been acting strange. The teasing could have ended there. Your soulmate wanted it to end there. But then one relative said something that made their entire body become still. They mentioned you. Not necessarily with your full name at first. Maybe they said, "Is this about that person?" Maybe they referred to something your soulmate had mentioned months earlier. Maybe someone had seen your name once, heard it in passing, or connected pieces your soulmate never realized they had left behind. Whatever the exact words were, the effect was immediate. Your soulmate stopped pretending. The room became curious. And suddenly, you were no longer a hidden thought. You were the center of a conversation. My child, understand what happened next. Different people in that room had different versions of you in their minds. Some knew almost nothing. Some had heard one or two details. One person may have remembered your soulmate speaking about you during a completely unrelated conversation. Another may have sensed that someone existed but never knew who. And at least one person had already formed an opinion based on incomplete information. That opinion was about to create tension. Someone asked, "So who exactly is this person?" Your soulmate hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Because everyone in the room knew what your soulmate usually sounded like when something was casual. They could explain casual relationships easily. They could laugh about crushes. They could dismiss passing connections. But your soulmate could not describe you without becoming emotionally exposed. They began carefully. They explained something about how you entered their life. They spoke about a moment that seemed ordinary at the time but later became strangely important. They mentioned one quality about you that they had never forgotten. Perhaps it was the way you listened. Perhaps it was the way you stayed calm when others would have become harsh. Perhaps it was your strength. Perhaps it was the strange mixture of softness and independence that made them curious about what you had experienced. Then something beautiful happened. Without planning to, your soulmate began smiling. Someone in the room noticed immediately. "Oh," that person said, "this is serious." Your soulmate denied it too quickly. And everyone heard the truth inside the denial. The conversation deepened. Questions started coming. How long have you known them? Do they know how you feel? Are you talking now? What happened between you? Why haven't we heard more about this? And then came the question your soulmate had feared. If this person matters this much, why are they not here? That question changed the energy completely. Your soulmate looked down. Because the answer was complicated. They could not simply say you did not care. They knew that would not be true. They could not say they had done everything possible, because deep inside, they knew there were moments when fear spoke louder than courage. They could not say circumstances alone were responsible, because they knew their own hesitation had contributed to the distance. For perhaps the first time in front of several people, your soulmate admitted something they had barely admitted privately. They were scared. Not scared of you. Scared of what loving you might require from them. The room became quiet. This was not what anyone expected. Your soulmate explained that you made them feel seen in a way that was difficult to hide from. Around most people, they could control the version of themselves they presented. They could be strong when they felt uncertain. They could be charming when they felt insecure. They could appear detached when they were actually afraid of being rejected. But something about you made that performance harder. One family member asked why. Your soulmate's answer surprised even them. Because they notice things. Those 4 words opened another door. Your soulmate started describing moments you probably did not realize they remembered. A time when you recognized something was wrong without being told. A moment when you gave them space instead of demanding answers. A sentence you said casually that stayed with them for weeks. A moment when you challenged them, not cruelly, but honestly. Something you did that made them realize you were not impressed by appearances alone. You wanted truth. The more your soulmate spoke, the more their family understood that this was not an ordinary attraction. But then the tension arrived. One person in that room was not convinced. They questioned whether the connection had been idealized. They wondered whether your soulmate was seeing you clearly or merely holding on to the idea of you because the relationship had never reached its natural conclusion. They suggested that sometimes people become attached to unfinished stories precisely because they remain unfinished. Your soulmate listened. For a moment, it looked as though they might agree. Then they said something that stunned the room. If it was only unfinished, I would have forgotten. No one interrupted. Your soulmate continued. I've had unfinished things before. They faded. This didn't. My child, that confession mattered because your soulmate was no longer defending an image of you. They were confronting their own history. They knew they had moved on from people before. They knew time could reduce intensity. They knew absence usually created distance. But somehow, when it came to you, distance had created clarity. Not every day. Not every moment. There were times when your soulmate tried to convince themselves that the feeling was gone. They became busy. They focused elsewhere. They may have entertained other possibilities. They may have told themselves that what happened between you belonged to another chapter. And then, something would bring you back. A place. A phrase. A dream. A stranger with a similar laugh. A conversation about the future. A sudden memory while driving. And every time your soulmate expected the feeling to be weaker. Instead, it felt more honest. Someone in the family asked whether you had hurt them. That question was dangerous, because it could have created a simple villain and victim story. Your soulmate could have used it to protect their pride. They could have told only the moments when they felt misunderstood. They could have highlighted your mistakes and hidden their own. But what came next changed the atmosphere again. Your soulmate defended you. They said you were not perfect. They admitted there had been misunderstandings. They acknowledged moments when both of you may have reacted from wounds rather than wisdom. But then they said, you don't know what they were carrying. That sentence silenced someone who had been ready to judge you. Your soulmate knew pieces of your story that they had never fully appreciated while everything was happening. Time had given them perspective. They had begun connecting your reactions to experiences you had endured before them. They had realized that certain walls you built were not punishment. They were protection. Certain silences were not indifference. They were exhaustion. Certain moments when you stepped back were not proof that you did not care. You may have been trying to preserve the parts of yourself you had fought hard to rebuild. Your soulmate's voice changed as they spoke about this. The family heard it. There was regret there. And tenderness. One person asked, "Did you ever tell them you understand that now?" Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That silence was an answer. No. Not fully. Perhaps not at all. Something shifted in your soulmate then. Until that moment, the conversation had mostly been about explaining you to the family. Suddenly, they realized they were explaining themselves to themselves. They had spent so much time asking why you behaved certain ways that they had not asked whether you ever felt safe enough to behave differently. They had wanted reassurance without always giving it. They had wanted clarity while remaining guarded. They had wanted you to understand their fears while sometimes overlooking your own. And sitting there among people who loved them enough to ask uncomfortable questions, your soulmate saw the contradiction. My child, this is where the conversation became extraordinary. Because one older family member, someone who had remained quiet almost the entire time, finally spoke. This person did not ask about your appearance. They did not ask about your background. They did not ask whether you fit some checklist. They looked at your soulmate and asked one question. Who were you before this person, and who are you now? No one expected that. Your soulmate looked confused at first. The relative repeated it differently. Forget whether the relationship worked perfectly. Forget what anyone thinks. Did knowing this person make you more honest with yourself or less? Your soulmate became emotional. Because the answer arrived immediately. More honest. You had forced them to confront things. Their fear of vulnerability. Their tendency to delay important conversations. Their habit of pretending not to care when they cared deeply. Their desire for approval. Their fear of disappointing family. Their uncertainty about what kind of love they actually wanted. You had not entered their life merely as romance. You had become a mirror. And mirrors are not always comfortable. Sometimes people run from the person who reveals them most clearly because being seen creates responsibility. Once someone exposes the difference between who you are and who you could become, you can no longer pretend you do not know. Your soulmate admitted this. They said, quietly, I think they changed me. The room went still. But the older relative corrected them. No. They may have awakened something. You still have to decide what you do with it. That sentence remained suspended in the air. Your soulmate looked away. And then another family member revealed something nobody expected. They had seen your soulmate after one of the most difficult moments connected to you. Your soulmate had believed they hid it. They had not. This person remembered a night when your soulmate came home unusually quiet. They barely ate. They avoided conversation. They sat alone longer than usual. At the time, the family member thought it was work pressure or some unrelated disappointment. Now they realized it had been about you. The family member described what they saw. Your soulmate seemed almost embarrassed. But they did not deny it. And suddenly, the entire room understood how long this connection had been affecting them. It had not appeared yesterday. This had roots. Someone who had been skeptical became softer. Another person asked whether you had any idea how deeply your soulmate cared. Again, your soulmate could not answer confidently. And that uncertainty hurt them more than expected. Because what if you did not know? What if you had interpreted silence as absence? What if you had accepted distance as the final answer because your soulmate never found the courage to give you the truth? What if you had spent months or years believing you were easy to forget while they were secretly struggling to forget you? The possibility disturbed them. Your soulmate began asking themselves questions out loud. Do you think I never cared? Someone answered gently. If you never told them, what else were they supposed to believe? Those words landed heavily. Not as blame. As truth. Heaven often uses simple truth to dismantle complicated excuses. My child, your soulmate had built explanations for their silence. They told themselves timing was wrong. They told themselves they needed certainty before speaking. They told themselves they did not want to confuse you. They told themselves that if the connection was meant to return, circumstances would somehow bring it back naturally. But beneath those reasons was one fear they rarely admitted. What if they reached for you and discovered you no longer wanted them? Silence protected them from that answer. But silence also risked losing you forever. Their family saw this immediately. One relative said something almost playful but painfully accurate. So you're waiting for a guarantee before taking a risk in love? Your soulmate smiled sadly. Because it sounded ridiculous when someone else said it. There are no guarantees in love. Only choices. Only courage. Only honesty. Only the decision to show up without knowing exactly how the story ends. The gathering that had started as casual curiosity had become something else entirely. It had become an emotional reckoning. But there was still one thing nobody had said. One piece of information that would change the direction of the entire conversation. A family member who had been unusually quiet began looking uncomfortable. Your soulmate noticed. What? The person shook their head. Nothing. But everyone knew it was not nothing. What do you know? The room turned toward them. They hesitated. Your soulmate's expression changed. The relative finally admitted that they knew more about you than anyone realized. Your soulmate immediately asked how. The answer was not what they expected. Months earlier, completely by coincidence, this family member had encountered someone connected to you. Not necessarily your closest friend. Not someone who knew every private detail. But someone who knew enough. At the time, the family member had not understood the significance. They had heard your name. They had heard something about your life. They had heard one detail that did not seem important then. Now, sitting in this room, realizing exactly who you were, that detail suddenly meant everything. Your soulmate leaned forward. What did they say? The relative hesitated again. And this time the hesitation made everyone nervous. Because the information was not gossip. It was not scandal. It was something much more personal. Something that changed the way your soulmate understood one of the most painful chapters between you. The relative looked directly at your soulmate and said, I don't think you know what was happening in their life when you thought they were pulling away from you. Your soulmate froze. The entire room became silent. They asked what that meant. The relative began explaining carefully. During the period your soulmate had interpreted as rejection, you had apparently been dealing with something emotionally heavy outside the relationship. Something that consumed your energy. Something you did not want to burden others with. Something that may have caused you to become quieter, more guarded, and less available. Your soulmate's face changed. Because suddenly several memories rearranged themselves. Messages they had misunderstood. Delayed responses they had taken personally. Moments when you sounded tired. Times when you tried to say you had a lot going on, but they assumed it was a polite way of creating distance. They had interpreted your struggle as lack of interest. And because they feared rejection, they withdrew too. Two wounded people had stood on opposite sides of silence, each assuming the other was choosing distance.